Welcome back, everybody. Here's our deck presentation, PDF Mail, Format Overview Tool, Architecture, and Future Directions by our very own host, Chris Prom and Tom Habing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ruby. Just want to do a quick sound check and video check here to make sure that everybody can see me and can see the presentation. So let me know if that's not the case. It is a great pleasure for me to be here and to be talking a little bit about the work on the other grant project that I'm involved with here at the University of Illinois. As Ruby said, my name is Chris Prom, and I'm the currently Associate Dean for Digital Strategies here at the library, and I also work in our office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation on campus. What I'll be doing here is describing an overarching project that Tom Habing, who is with me here this morning, and I are involved with, and on which Eden Irwin, who is running things behind the scenes here as the project fellow for the email archiving in PDF project, is also involved, along with Peter Wyatt from the PDF Association and many other members of the PDF Association as well. So I do want to acknowledge particularly the contributions that Eden and Peter and Ruby have made to the slides that I'll be presenting. As I said, we'll be, and as you can see from the title here, what we'll be doing essentially is giving you a format overview for this proposed PDF mail format, and also a description of a tool architecture that Tom is developing to provide some instantiations of those PDF mail files, so we can see what they would look like and use them. And then we'd of course very much welcome a discussion with all of you about future directions for the project. So before we get to the format overview and the tool architecture, I'm going to provide just a little bit of background and then hopefully leave quite a bit of time here actually for Tom to delve into some of the tool architecture and format specific questions and perspectives that have arisen. So before doing that, I'd also like to give credit where some credit is due here, both to the Mellon Foundation and now to the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The Mellon Foundation had funded phase 1 of this project, which I'll describe in just a moment, and the Institute for Museum and Library Services is funding the second phase. And we are in the second year of a 2-year project, which is likely to be extended slightly in respect to, having a few delays due to COVID and other factors that haven't impeded the overall progress on the project, but still cause us to take a little bit of additional time. So the first phase of the email archiving and PDF project, as I said, was funded by the Mellon Foundation. And the real purpose of that project was to draw together a group, both from the archives and the academic community, and more to the point from industry as well, and from the PDF industry. And the primary goal of that project was to answer a relatively straightforward, but more complex once you dive into it sort of question, which is, does it make sense to archive emails in PDF or to have a representation format for emails in PDF? And if so, what basic functional requirements should PDF versions of the email documents support? The reason why this had become an issue and the reason why this was suggested is that as the Future of Email Archiving report was being developed, there had been some strong suggestions in that report and in the working group of that report that in fact it made sense to think about a PDF representation of email. So that's what this group, which was drawn together, looked at. And in November of 2019, pre-pandemic, the group you see represented here met at the Library of Congress to discuss these topics. It was very much a new experience for me. I would say the last thing, I expected to ever be doing when I first encountered archives or digital archives was be, meeting with a group of technical experts to think about defining a file format, particularly a PDF-based file format. But through that conversation that developed, we got a deeper understanding of both the PDF format and potential benefits that it could play for email preservation or representation in PDF. So the first thing we looked at essentially is that question in the report that I'll mention in a minute mentioned is why should we preserve emails with PDF? And the first of these answers to that question is essentially is that PDF can do things that archivists really, really care about when you understand the format and the extensibility of the format. That by fixing email into a defined packaged format, we can provide a lot more evidence about the original sender, the recipient, and the message itself. So the incredible amount of metadata that email holds, it can be encapsulated in PDF format using the structures that are there. The second reason why PDF is a format to consider for email representation is complementary to the first, and essentially boils down to the fact that many, if not most, archivists haven't still quite figured out how to preserve email. We've seen a lot of wonderful technical approaches and wonderful projects discussed in the seminar here and in the symposium here, but that doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of archivists really aren't doing anything with email in a substantive, systematic sort of way. So what you see on the screen here are actually the results of a survey that Ruby had administered here in the state of Illinois to smaller archives and to archives of all sizes. And you can see that of the 68 here, 60% of them have not collected email, and of the 35% that have, they haven't been processed. No, that's an issue. There's a lot of people that are not at this symposium and who might be looking for formats and perspectives and possibilities that other current email archiving software doesn't afford. This is just another example we found even in workshops that I've taught about email archiving, a group that has a pre-stated interest in the topic. Still, many of them are not collecting email and don't have email collections processed. So why is that the case? These are some responses from the survey, again, that Ruby did, indicating that a lot of archives feel like they lack the necessary training and the technology. Well, I certainly think that training such as the DPC training that we heard about earlier from this morning from Sharon will go a long way in helping repositories. We'd still also recognize that there are many archives that are using PDF in other ways and are likely preserving it for other document types. So that by providing a PDF option and using things that people are already using in their archives, we do provide an alternative in cases where it makes sense. In fact, we found that of those preserving email in our Illinois sample, most were already using PDF, even if it might not be the preferred, in fact, is not the preferred format. Jessica Dermasic in her talk yesterday presented a particularly good example of how you can systematically integrate PDF into an email archiving workflow. And we really want to make that type of possibility, fruitful for others who might pursue it as well. So that's a little bit about why PDF. And there's still another question out there, which is why not just use PDF-A, and which is the archival format. What we found as part of our discussion is that PDF-A in and of itself is sort of a necessary but not sufficient baseline for email preservation in the PDF format. So that in the spec development that we're doing, we're really seeking to build on top of the PDF spec today. The reason for that is that if you convert an email to PDF today ad hoc using some of the tooling that's out there, you can export an email from Gmail or Outlook or whatever in PDF, you really lose a lot of the vital rendering information and, more to the point, metadata. In addition, there are questions like how should we, how our attachments represented? Can bulk conversion take place? And really neither of those can be expected. In addition to that, most, if not all, of the metadata about the message is not preserved if you print a PDF today. Again, links in the document might be active, but what if the content at that link has moved or has gone missing? Is there a way actually to pull some of that content back into a PDF representation of the email? So these are all the types of questions that the spec really does intend to examine and look at. So what we're looking at a little bit is taking something of the fluidity of email and fixing it into a format that repositories are already familiar with and could perhaps use as an access copy, complementary to Mbox or other formats that they might be using for preservation, or in cases where they don't have the opportunity to use more advanced email archiving tools, preserve a PDF file, but also know that the full representation of that email is also preserved in the archival copy that they might take. So as a result of those conversations, which we worked out during the phase 1 of this project, we did publish a report which essentially articulates the rationale for the EA PDF project, defines conceptual requirements for the container format, and then describes functional requirements for EA PDF specific viewers, which leads into phase 2 of the project, which is where we are now located, and with funding provided by the IMLS. The University of Illinois became an institutional member of the PDF Association and is working with the PDF Association to build on the goals from the phase 1 project. Primarily, we're doing this through a liaison working group, which is a formal part of the PDF Association and includes representatives both from the PDF community, including technical architects from Adobe, from other major PDF developers, and also representatives from the archives and library and digital preservation community. So the goals of the phase 2 project essentially are 3. First, I've already implied this academic and industry partnership through the PDF Association. The main goal and the most important one is the development of a detailed technical description for the EA PDF file format. And then the third goal, happening in parallel with the specification development, is a proof of concept open source EA PDF writer or creator software, which is what Tom will talk about in a minute. Quite a bit, the hope of the project is that by developing the spec and the tooling at the same time, the spec development informs the tooling and the tooling development informs the spec. As I mentioned, the PDF Association is our major partner in this. Quite appropriately, today is actually, believe it or not, the 30th anniversary of the PDF file format. And if you'd like to read about that, you can read about it and even see a teaser for, believe it or not, a documentary about the PDF file format that the association is developing on their website. Okay, so current work, we are deep into the process with the liaison working group, which is an internal process in the PDF Association to develop the draft spec for comment. We have 0.2 of the spec that we're currently reviewing, and our current timeline suggests that by the middle to the end of the summer, we should have a draft of the specification available for public comment. Because it is being developed by the PDF Association and can feed into the ISO process, we're following the defined process for developing a specification that the association supports, and that involves internal development of the spec prior to release for public comment. As I said, UIUC, we're leading tool development concurrently, and then as the tool is further developed, we plan to release that for collaboration and testing as well. So this is just a snippet of some of the key design decisions that the group has worked through with Peter Wyatt, who is the Chief Technology Officer of the association. One of the things we've been very clear to do is define a core representation of email, and in particular core metadata fields from the message that should be both visually represented in the email and also written into XMP metadata. Things like the top, the from, the to, the sender, the recipient, the date, so on and so forth. This spec also supports embedded files within the PDF file itself, including the raw email file that's used to create the message. So we'll have a representation of the source file right in the PDF as an embedded file, compressed. The spec will also support email attachments being included in the file, again, in their original file format, which may or may not be something that you get with current email to PDF creation software. And then also the inclusion of HTML assets or materials that are harvested from other locations, from cloud services or third-party websites. The spec also has an XMP-based metadata schema that we're developing, and Tom can tell you more about in a moment, as well as some navigational aids and support for those like outlines, tables of contents, file attachment, annotations, and so on. These will be encoded as tagged PDF, essentially. As I mentioned, we're developing a PDF or PDF mail creation software. And also we recognize that the files will be immediately useful in any PDF viewer software that you have right now, while also noting that the full functionality of EA PDF or PDF mail would be available through to be developed viewer software, which would fully leverage the metadata schema and some of the more advanced elements of the spec. So this just provides an overview of the XMP metadata schema that we're looking at. There are 3 profiles for messages. One would be a single email. You can also have multiple emails or a container of multiple emails, which would be used to represent essentially a folder structure, an account, or so on and so forth. There are profiles for the metadata that's attached at each of those levels. EA PDF has the ability to build hierarchies and metadata hierarchies similar to the way that we would describe archival materials, and we're really leveraging that. Again, a little bit more about the XMP for EA PDF. There is mandatory XMP at the document or file level, which would be exactly like it works currently with PDF-A, recognizing that a lot of the generics legacy software that's out there does not directly provide access to that XMP metadata. It would be available for document management systems or repository services that would be able to index it. And then for each individual email message, there are some core header fields, as I've said, that would also be expressed as XMP, and then for better search and discovery, made available as well for made available to existing document management systems. Before I turn things over to Tom here in just a moment, I would just like to note that for the EA PDF technology, it's important to keep in mind and disambiguate a few terms. So EA PDF is kind of the overall concept in which we encapsulate the idea of preserving email in PDF or representing it in PDF. PDF mail is the subset specification that we're currently developing. PDF-M might be a future potential ISO equivalent to PDF mail. And then, as I've pointed out, there are already profiles or conformance levels that Peter, who's the Chief Technology Officer at the PDF Association, has built into the draft spec. So, Tom, I believe I am ready to turn things over to you here, if that's right.
Yep, I believe so. And you're going to continue to drive the slides, right, Chris?
Yes, right.
All right. Although I will take over just briefly right after this slide. So Chris has already touched. Let me start off by introducing myself very briefly with the normal caveats that I've seen a number of people introduce themselves with. I'm not an archivist or a librarian. I'm a software developer, although I have actually been involved with digital libraries and archives developments for over 25 years. I'm actually retired from the University of Illinois right now, but I have been working part-time for Chris on this project quite enjoyably so. But I mean, my credentials go back to like the NDIP project at the Library of Congress, if there are any graybeards in the audience who even remember what that was. So just to kind of establish my credentials a little bit here. So Chris has covered a number of these points already. The fact that the PDF, the EA PDF files are required to be archival quality PDFs or PDF-A, and that's specifically A3 for the version 1.7 PDFs or A4 for the 2.0 PDF files. Chris already mentioned that there's a number of different there's actually 3 different profiles. One of them is one email message per PDF, multiple email messages for PDF, or there's a PDF technology called PDF portfolios, which allows you to sort of bundle multiple PDFs into a single PDF in that sort of a hierarchical fashion, if you will. Another sort of key technical point here is there's really 2 aspects to rendering emails inside of a PDF. One of them is the human readable aspect. And a lot of people are probably already familiar with this. I mean, you can go into Microsoft Outlook and do a save as email and do a save as PDF. And that's kind of is a good human readable aspect of this. But the major shortcoming of doing that is quite often you lose the attachments, you lose all of the rich metadata and provenance that's associated with that. And so that's the second aspect of this standard, is the machine readable aspect. And so the specification itself is fairly permissive as far as the human readability of these things go. You can, a developer has a fair amount of leeway to make these PDF files look however they want them to look, but the specification that's being developed will be fairly strict in terms of what the machine readability of these PDF email documents will be. And Chris also mentioned that one of our goals with this is to make as much of this accessible as possible in legacy PDF viewers. And I'll give a demo of this very briefly. And kind of going back, I mean, to this sort of machine or the human readable. I mean, you can have table of contents, you can have summaries, you might have conversion logs that describe kind of errors or warnings that you encountered and things like that. And this could all be embedded in the human readable version of these PDF documents. And another aspect of this is the metadata. And so right now, the specification, and this, Chris mentioned that that specification is at 0.2. The 0.2 specification was just sort of released publicly like earlier this week. And so there's still a lot of this stuff that's under discussion, but currently the specification is using a PDF standard called DParts or document parts. And so that was part of sort of some of these annex documents for PDF 1.7. It's actually part of the core specification for PDF 2.0. But these DParts allow you to describe a hierarchy within a PDF document and attach metadata to that hierarchy. And so you could have a set of, you could have a hierarchy, which might represent folders and subfolders of your email. And then there would be specific page ranges within that hierarchy, which represents an individual email message. And so this allows you to attach metadata at sort of the email account level and at the subfolder level, in addition to the email into the individual email message level. So Chris also mentioned, I mean, email attachments are going to be embedded as PDF attachments, in addition to the original source emails will also be embedded. And so I am going to try to share my screen right now and kind of show you one of these documents. So are people seeing my screen right now? You should.
It's loading.
Okay, there we
Okay,
go.
there you go.
All right. So you should be seeing a PDF document. This is in the Adobe Acrobat Pro reader here. And so this is kind of what I've chosen to do as far as the visual representation of these things. And so you see that there's a cover page and some sort of summary information about like whose email account this is and how many messages and so far, how many messages and attachments and so forth you see here. And then there's sort of a brief table of contents. And so the links that you see here, one of these will go to the source file. And so this is and so the origin of this, I'm a bit of a digital pack rat myself. And so the origin of this is a Mozilla Thunderbird folder that I kept for a project from many years ago. And so Mozilla Thunderbird stores emails as inbox files with nested subfolders and so forth. And so this is a particular subfolder of my old Thunderbird email. And so you can see here that there are actually 10 separate inbox files that were processed and embedded into this document. And so if you click on the go to source, it's just going to take you down to this list of file attachments. And you see that right at the top of this is the DLF distributed library. That's an inbox file. And I'm choosing to store those files using the SHA-256 checksum as the file name for this inbox file. And I'm doing that for attachments also. A number of reasons for that. One of them is to avoid file collisions. And so if you have a large email corpus with lots of attachments, chances are you're going to run into file naming collisions, which I wanted to avoid. And so you can see the original file name and then the checksum here. And so if you actually jump over to the list of attachments for this document, hopefully everyone is seeing this, you can actually, let me find a source file here. Here's one of the source files. If you double click on this, it will actually extract it from the PDF file, and this is the gory inbox file in all its detail here. Likewise, you can do that for the various attachments also. And so double click on one of these and open up one of the attachments from this collection of emails that I've converted into a PDF here. Let me jump back to this and just kind of show you how an individual message is being rendered. And so the specification itself sort of talks about sort of highly recommended email headers that should be displayed in the human readable portion of this, like the from and the to and the subject. I mean, the stuff that you would actually expect here. The next thing I do is sort of create a table of contents for the individual message. And so if anybody is familiar with the inbox and the MIME formats, I mean, typically an email message can have a nested structure of sort of alternatives. And so there's a plain text and an HTML version and then the attachments and so forth. And so if I wanted to see what the HTML version of this message was, I could just click on the go to content, and there's the HTML rendering of that particular message. And you'll see here is also the plain text rendering of that exact same message. And then finally, there's the attachments. And so once again, I can click on this, and it'll take you down to my sort of mapping directory, if you will, that says that this ILMS PDF is actually stored in this PDF document as this file name, and it would allow you to sort of go over and retrieve that particular attachment if you wanted to. Admittedly, this is a little bit clunky at this point. We're working on ways to improve this a little bit. Another thing to point out is that these are PDF files, and as part of my development, I'm using the Adobe Preflight to check this, and so you can see that this does validate according to Adobe Preflight. I'm also using a tool called Vera PDF as part of my development process, and so any one of these PDFs that's generated will be run through this tool to check that it conforms to all the PDF A3 rules. One last thing is talking about the dpart metadata a little bit. This is an aspect of this that's not readily accessible through legacy PDF viewers. And it's partly because the dpart specification is a fairly new inclusion into the PDF standard itself. Adobe, you can get a plugin for Adobe called the Callus PDF dpartner plugin. If you open this, give me a second here, it will actually parse this PDF file and look for all of those dparts. And so there's like a root level, and then you can kind of drill down. And this is, and if you drill down to one of the leaf nodes, you can see that this is a particular message that starts on page 157, and the DPM stands for the dpart metadata. And so this is actually an XMP stream in PDF parlance that ties directly back to that particular page. And so that XMP stream contains the metadata for the machine readable RDF XMP metadata for that particular email message. And future tools will be able to extract that XMP metadata from this if you're developing sort of a more fulsome email processing workflow based on this standard, for example. I think Chris will talk a little bit about this right at the very end of our presentation. And just to kind of go down a little bit further to illustrate that this is a hierarchy, I mean, you can jump down to one of those sub-level messages, and you can see that this actually starts on page 847 and ends on page 846 to 847, and see the metadata for that. So Chris, if you could jump back to the PowerPoint slides, take over the screen sharing here.
Just 1 minute, Tom. I'm trying to get that set back up again. And
all right.
I think, do you see that now? Nope, you've got the wrong thing.
Yeah, I see your screen.
Yep, just a second. Let me make sure we've got everything set up here the way I want it to be. Okay.
I apologize for sort of breezing. I feel like I'm talking very quickly and breezing through a lot of this. So hopefully I will finish up and we'll have time for questions.
Oh, no,
okay,
you're good.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
So yeah, if you would go to the next slide, Chris. Apologies for the spaghetti monster here, but this is sort of a graphical representation of how we're using this dpart specification and how it maps back to an email archive. I gave a sort of a brief sort of overview of how this works, but we have a sort of a conceptual model of what an email archive might be. It consists of email accounts, and those email accounts are archived in what I'm calling an email account snapshot. And a snapshot can contain multiple email folders, and folders can be nested within other folders here. That's the contains folder, and folders contain messages, and messages contain attachments, for example. And there can be metadata associated with any one of those objects all along that stream. That's what you see on the right-hand side of this diagram. If you look over to the left-hand side, this is how that email model is mapped into the PDF mail. And so there's sort of document level XMP metadata. There's also metadata associated with folders. And then there's metadata associated with the messages themselves. And so without sort of belaboring this point, I mean, people can go back and look at this, and please ask questions at the end of this if you have any questions about this in particular. Next slide, Chris. So a little bit more detail about what we're calling the proof of concept implementation. As Chris mentioned, our purview is strictly an EA PDF creation tool. And so it's a work in progress. I mentioned that the 0.2 spec was released last week, and there's still some very active discussions going on about especially how metadata is going to be mapped and things like that. But ultimately, our goal for this is to have a command line utility that can create EA PDF documents, like the one that I just demoed on my screen. We're looking at into the future at possibly having a GUI interface for this, for example. Right now, you can point this tool at a folder full of inbox files or at a folder full of EML files. That's essentially an individual email message in MIME format. We're looking at the possibility in the future of processing Microsoft Outlook PST files and also the possibility of directly connecting to like the Microsoft Exchange API or the Gmail API and sort of slurping emails in directly via these APIs is another possibility as well. And then the output of this tool is going to be one or more PDF documents. A lot of our work was inspired by the DARC mail tool and also the the email archive XML schema, the EAXS schema that came out of the North Carolina State Archives and the Smithsonian and their tomes project, if people are familiar with that. All of our work right now is going to be open source. We do have a GitHub repository set up for this. The normal caveats apply if anyone is going to look at this, is it's still a work in progress. You're going to have to be a pretty techie person to really make any use of this right now. There's really no command line tool. It's all sort of the raw library and code at this point that resides in our repository. I don't have this on the slide, but it's probably worth mentioning that this is being implemented with the Microsoft .NET framework and a C# programming language. I'm using versions of this that should allow me to compile this into cross-platform executables, either for Linux, Mac, or the Windows platform. I'm doing most of my work in Windows, but our goal is to be able to do that for a cross-platform as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Chris. This is another little bit of a spaghetti diagram here, but this hopefully will illustrate sort of what the process flow is for my particular creation, EAPDF creation tool is. And so I mentioned that I sort of inspired by this EAXS XML schema, if you will. And so you kind of start off, like I mentioned, with a folder full of inbox or EML files. And the first thing that happens is that I'm using what I think is a very good open source mailbox or inbox MIME processing tool called MIMEKit. And so I parse all of these inbox and EML files using this MIMEKit tool, and I convert those into an EAXSL XML file. I will say that I have made fairly significant modifications to that XML schema specifically to support what I need for the PDF processing. But if anyone's familiar with that XML file and look at one of the files that I produce, it'll probably look just like an EAXSL file for you. And so this converts the emails into this XML thing that you see on the right there with the count folders and messages. At the same time, it also extracts all of the attachments from an email message and it stores those in the file system. And it also does probably a bunch of other stuff I'm forgetting, but one of the important things is it sanitizes the HTML and the plain text and so forth, so it's easier to sort of embed within the XML files. You see that there's sort of a left-hand box and a right-hand box here. This kind of gets to the point of sort of there's the visual rendering aspects of this, and there's also the sort of the metadata machine readable aspects of this. And so if you go down to step number 2, this is sort of the first step in taking that XML document and turning it into a renderable, human readable PDF. And so I'm using the XSLT, which is the XML style sheet language transformation language, to transform that EAXS file into XSLFO, which is a page formatting language, if you will. And there's a number of tools, both open source and commercial, that can take the XSLFO document and actually turn it into a PDF or a PostScript or HTML, a lot of different sort of end products. But I'm using two different tools to do that at this point. One of them is the Apache FOP program. This is an XSLFO processor, I think is what that stands for. And just to keep myself honest, I also have an evaluation copy of a tool from a company called RenderX, which is an XML or is an FO processor as well. One of the things I'm trying to do with this is to make it as modular as possible. And so people can plug and play. So if you want to use FOP, you can. If you want to use RenderX, you can. Antenna House is another big company that has a commercial FO processor, which is very good. So you can sort of plug in and play different sort of rendering tools into this workflow if you want. And so what that FO processor does is it sucks in the email attachments, it sucks in any fonts or color profiles, or if there are embedded images that are required for like an HTML page that live out on the internet, it slurps all of those in and creates the PDF document. Moving over to the right side of this diagram, you see that there's the part that does the machine readable part. And so I use an XSLT, once again, a different XSLT to process that EAXS file and extract the metadata into an XMP RDF format. And then using some post-processing, and this is where I get into some lower level tools. I am using the iText Sharp, which is an open source email or open source PDF processing tool to essentially insert the D parts and the metadata into that PDF document, and the end product is the EA PDF document. So hopefully that was a little more clear than mud, but a lot going on there. I apologize for all the techie speak here. So move on to the next slide, Chris. Some of the challenges that I've dealt with, some people may have seen the acronym GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, and so I'm dealing. But purposefully, I'm dealing with some very old email corpuses going back 20 or more years. And so you can, anything that is possible to have in an old email, you're going to see it in these emails. Control characters that people are familiar back in the day, you could copy something out of a Word document and then paste it into an HTML page, and you'd get all these weird characters and stuff like that. So I'm encountering a lot of that. I mean, especially ancient HTML content. I've seen a lot of commercial content in these old emails where they use nested tables, like 5 or 10 levels deep of nested HTML tables to get their formatting with non-breaking spaces all over the place and things like that. A challenge of dealing with non-Western languages, right to left languages, spotty tool support, and sort of what I would call a bleeding edge PDF feature, which is this D-part stuff that I've already mentioned. So next slide, Chris. I think you're up next.
Right, I think I am. And Tom, thank you for that. I'm just going to end very briefly by noting a point that's a little bit implicit in what Tom was saying. But in order to leverage the full value of the spec as it's developing, a next step after PDF creation software is built, either the software that Tom's working on, the open source software, or software that some developers in the PDF community might develop. The next step really would be to have some EA PDF or PDF mail viewer software developed, which would provide a full sort of rendering experience like you see on the little mock-up that I've done here. I do want to reiterate that that's a very sort of prospective thing that would follow after the development of the creation software. Relative to or relevant to that, Claudia asked an excellent question, which is whether developers of PDF converters that will support or work on converting to PDF mail. And that's really the value of being part of the PDF Association community, because we have on any given call, anywhere from 6 to 12 or more representatives of PDF companies that are following the work closely, and some of whom appear to be developing their own implementations in parallel with the work we're doing. So that is a hope that there'll be other development options out there as well. As the next step, then, as I say, we're continuing the spec development. We do anticipate that a public version of the spec will be available for comment later this summer. And since we're very short on time here, I'm just going to open things up for questions now.
There's a couple of questions in the Q&A, Chris. One of them from Nathan about criticisms of PDF A4 because it allows external entities to be embedded, which was contrary to the goal of archival PDF. And I can address this a little bit, is that we actually are required to use either PDF A3 or PDF A4 because those are the only two versions of the PDF standard that do allow external entities to be embedded within the PDF document. And so that was quite deliberate, and I think that's why PDF A3 and A4 were actually developed beyond PDF A2, is so it would allow attachments like that. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is open to debate with the PDFA community. So I don't know if you could add to that, Chris.
No, I'm not able to really. I mean, I think the key point is whatever is attached to an email message or whatever HTML assets there might be in an email message would be passed through as they are. So yeah, that's just a baseline sort of a piece of knowledge to have about the spec as it's developing, but I'm perhaps not anywhere near as up on that criticism there as Nathan you might be. And then your other question here about accessibility, I was double checking the spec, after you asked that, because we had a discussion about it in the liaison working group, whether or not to require formal PDF UA, to require PDF UA, which is the universal accessibility. And Peter, for a variety of reasons, recommend we not make formal PDF UA compliance a required part of the spec. But the spec is also very explicit about the ways in which metadata structures should be built and include some of the same types of recommendations. I can't remember exactly why he didn't think that UA was good, but I know he had some concerns that it would raise some overhead and cause some conflicts with the PDFA in a way that was not completely clear to me at the time, but he was very very clear that it would be difficult to do that.
I can comment on that briefly as well. I mean, I'm far from being an expert on accessibility. I am trying to do the right thing, at least for the content that I have control over in terms of tagging things as P's and headers and all of that, sort of the basic stuff, and having alternate text for images and so forth. But another aspect of this is sort of the garbage in, garbage out aspect. I mean, if I'm trying to render like an ancient HTML page into the PDF, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to make that legacy HTML accessible with nested tables and all this stuff that they told you that you're never supposed to do, but people 20 years ago was common practice, for example.
We do have a couple of additional questions here. I'm going to suggest that because we're a few minutes over, perhaps we break here, and then I will answer those to the best of my ability over the Q&A system in written format. But again, just like to thank you all for your time. Ruby, do you have anything else here before we take our lunch break?
Nope, I do not.
Okay, great. Well, we hope to see many of you back at 1 p.m. Central Time. And thank you again. Look forward to seeing you at 1.
Thanks, everybody.